My mom's watching the game on TV back in Canada. I don't want her to see her son die.
Our story begins on June 10th, 1981 in Montreal, Quebec, where Clint Malarchuk was drafted 74th overall by the Quebec Nordiques in the 1981 NHL entry draft. He was highly touted as a future regular NHLer and a solid backup, with a potential ceiling as a solid starter option. He would play his first NHL game later that season on December 13th, 1981 against the Buffalo Sabres, resulting in a 4-4 tie. And yes, there were ties back then. His second game came 2 nights later in a game he'd probably like to forget, allowing 10 against the Islanders in a 10-7 loss on optional goaltending night. After this, he'd bounce back and forth between the AHL and the NHL until he got his big break for the 1985-86 season. In somewhat of a shocking turn of events, Malarchuk became the primary tendy for the 1985-86 season over fan favorite Mario Gosselin. It stayed that way in Quebec for 2 seasons, and he took them to the playoffs both of those seasons until he was traded to the Washington Capitals alongside Dale Hunter in exchange for Gaetan Duchesne, Alan Hayworth, and a first-round draft pick who ended up being future Hall of Famer Joe Sakic. He stayed with the Capitals for the next season and a half, putting up pretty decent numbers until he was traded to the Buffalo Sabres on March 7th, 1989.
He played 7 games with them after the trade, putting up a .908 save percentage, which was pretty impressive for the 80s. Malarchuk was playing the best hockey of his career when he arrived in Buffalo. But unfortunately, this is where our story is just beginning.
It was a chilly, early spring night in upstate New York where the Buffalo Sabres had a late season tilt against the St. Louis Blues at the Buffalo Memorial Auditorium. Both teams had pretty mediocre records coming into this game, but were both destined to make the playoffs just a few weeks later.
Clint Malarchuk is back in goal. Boucher played in that victory over the Winnipeg Jets on Monday night.
The game was underway to a typical start. Back and forth chances, a few penalties, but that was until Blues shutdown defenseman Gaston Gingras opened the scoring nearly 10 minutes into the first period. The game played on and the Blues had a chance on the counterattack. Dave Lowry corralled a pass in the neutral zone and dumped it in. Meanwhile, Steve Tuttle was crashing the net with Sabres defenseman Uwe Krupp right on his back. Rick Maher picked it up in the corner and threw one out in front. Steve Tuttle lost his balance from Krupp's pressure, and his skate inadvertently came up and unfortunately caught Clint Malarchuk in the neck.
Oh, wow!
Malarchuk laid on the ice, with a pool of blood beneath him. He didn't know it yet, but his carotid artery was severed and his jugular vein was partially cut. And in return, this caused 11 fans to faint, 2 to have heart attacks, and 3 players to vomit on the ice. Sabres athletic trainer Jim Pizzatelli rushed out onto the ice. Knowing Malarchuk was just seconds away from death, Pizzatelli's Vietnam War experience served him well. He grabbed Malarchuk's neck and pinched his blood vessels to hold the blood in. Amazingly, Clint was able to skate off the ice himself, and even joked if he could return for the 3rd period. However, he still thought he was going to die, and reportedly asked Robert Simonik, an equipment manager, to call his mother and tell her he loved her. Pizzatelli held his neck for hours until the doctors at Buffalo General Hospital could stitch his 6.5-inch wound. In the end, he received 300 stitches and lost 1.5 liters of blood. And despite all this, he was back on the ice just 10 days later. Unreal stuff. And on top of that, he was the Sabres starting goalie in Game 2 of Round 1 against the Boston Bruins just 2 weeks after the injury. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. Malarchuk's career steadily declined after this incident until he played his final NHL game on April 14th, 1992, in a 7-3 loss against the Quebec Nordiques. He ended his career with 337 games, 141 wins, 12 shutouts, a 3.47 goals against average, and an .885 save percentage with the Quebec Nordiques, Washington Capitals, and the Buffalo Sabres. He would go on to play in minor leagues for a few seasons and eventually transitioned into coaching in 1996. His first NHL coaching stint came in 2002 as a goalie coach for the Florida Panthers for 1 season. This is where he trained a young Roberto Luongo. He got another crack as a goalie coach in Columbus for the 2006-07 season. He was set to return to Columbus for a 3rd season in the 2008-09 season until disaster struck.
911, what's your emergency, please?
On October 7, 2008, Malarchuk suffered a self-inflicted gunshot wound to his chin from a .22 caliber rifle at his home in Fish Springs, Nevada. After years of battling OCD, PTSD from the injury, stress, and alcoholism, he attempted to end his life. He was flown to renowned regional medical center in Reno, Nevada, and woke up in intensive care after a 2-month coma. He was then sent to a rehab hospital for 6 months to be treated for his OCD, PTSD, stress, and alcoholism.
This rehab seemed to help Malarchuk, and on June 11, 2011, the Calgary Flames hired him as their goaltending coach. Malarchuk was back in business, training the tail end of legendary goalie Mika Kiprasov's career. Unfortunately, in the summer of 2014, Malarchuk and the Flames parted ways. But a few months later in November, Clint Malarchuk released his famous autobiography titled The Crazy Game, which discussed his injury and the after effects of it, along with advocating for mental health. Following this, him and his wife Joan began traveling around the world to advocate for OCD, PTSD, substance abuse, suicide prevention, and mental health. They've spoke at many places, including the Canadian Mental Health Association, International OCD Foundation, TED Talks, and many more. And at 64 years old, they're still doing it today.
Clint Malarchuk's injury changed the sport of hockey forever. Due to this incident, many goalies opted to wear neck or throat protectors. And now, after the unfortunate Adam Johnson incident and the growing concern of safety in the sport, the NHL has agreed to make neck protectors mandatory for all players in the 2026-2027 season.
The story of Clint Malarchuk is truly unique, and his display of strength, resilience, and perseverance is extremely admirable. Even though he was down many points in his career and personal life, he always found his way back up. He truly is an amazing player and person.